Hello, Assalamu alaikum. My name is Sheherbano Naqvi, and I'm a writer that primarily dabbles in poetry, primarily and most recently. I started writing poetry just 3 years ago. Before that, poetry was always this medium that, as a writer, I was kind of intimidated by. As someone who appreciates art and as someone who enjoys reading, I always appreciated poetry a lot as a medium. But as a writer, I found it intimidating in the sense that, it is a very complex and layered medium with, layers and layers of meanings, nuances, imagery, reading between the lines. And there's so much packed in within a poem that as an artist, as a writer, to deliver that was always very intimidating to me. And then 3 years ago, I lost my older brother to suicide. And I was then confronted with immense grief. And grief itself is a very layered, complex emotion, packed with nuances of its own. And so I found myself naturally gravitating towards poetry to express myself. Um, and at which point, suddenly, now that I was looking to express an emotion that was just as complex and layered, all the things that intimidated me about poetry were the very reasons that were now pulling me towards it. The complex layers and, the lack of structure and rigidity suddenly appealed to me even more. Poetry gave me the flexibility and the room to play around and to manipulate the words to serve me as opposed to the other way around. And so I think a part of the beauty of poetry is exactly that. For me, as a writer who's expressing herself in that medium, I found a lot of catharsis in the room to be flexible and almost the permission to be ambiguous. But I think it goes a lot deeper than that as well. It goes deeper in the sense of how that ambiguity allows that poem to lend itself to so many of us. For instance, everything I write is inspired from personal feelings or personal incidents, specific things that happen to me personally or around me personally. But when I write it and when I translate that experience into a poetic medium, everything I say and the imagery, the rhetorical devices you use to create that poetic image of the personal incident you're sharing, that those rhetorical devices and the ambiguity that they lend to it allow for that specific incident and that specific feeling to resonate with so many of us. For me, that kind of perfectly encapsulates the beauty of poetry. That specific ambiguity, which is, you know, as an artist, as a writer, I am writing from a personal experience. I am sharing something extremely personal to me. But, grief is universal, loss is universal, mental health is universal, human emotion is universal. And so I may come from a very specific place, I may be inspired from a very specific place, but the emotion that's captured in a poem resonates with so many of us. And that ambiguity creates that room for so many of us to be able to come together, with wounds that may come from very, very specific to us places. But we come together in a place where all of us share a certain human emotion. We share the universal feeling. We share a human connection, a connection that transcends, the bounds of time and space. So it doesn't matter if this poem was written, in a previous century, a previous decade. It really doesn't matter, because what we connect with is how much of ourselves we end up finding in someone else's words. So, as a writer that truly appreciates and is always in awe of the power of art in general, and as someone who's very excited to still be exploring new mediums like poetry, I really hope that we can all recognize the power of art. And as a writer herself who intends on contributing to this world, I sincerely hope that whoever does read my work ends up finding the room for their own emotions to also be held, ends up finding a space for healing and ends up finding this feeling of solidarity, that we aren't alone in this experience by any means. Just before I wrap up, I hope you guys check out my poetry. I share it on Instagram under the pen name Ba Naqvi. And I sincerely hope that we all find spaces that are holding and healing, not necessarily just in poetry, but anywhere else that we may be looking. And thank you so much, Hub Daily, for letting me speak to all of you.